healthcare aims to improve health through a threefold strategy. First, we want to advance diagnosis and treatment. Second, we know that we need to motivate healthy behaviors and lifestyles. And third, we want to use this, refined and deep understanding of our genetics to help make those treatments and those behavioral therapies more precise. Our work in our lab looks at another factor, and that factor is mindset. How our thoughts, beliefs, expectations can shape our health directly, and how those mindsets are informed by the social context in which they're set. So we look at how mindsets affect our health directly, but also how they can influence our health by shaping or moderating the effect of drugs and therapies, of healthy behaviors, or even our genetic predispositions on our health outcomes. So we look at a lot of mindsets in a range of different domains. We've done research on treatment mindsets, mindsets about our bodies and their capabilities, mindsets about the meaning of illness. We've looked at a lot of mindsets in the domain of health behaviors, mindsets about food, exercise, and stress. And more recently, we've been investigating the role of our mindsets in shaping our genetic risk. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a mindset is, at least how do we think about what a mindset is and why it matters so much. And then secondly, I'm going to go into deeper detail about two mindsets in particular and give you some examples and evidence to support why our mindsets play a key role in shaping our health. So what is a mindset? Well, mindsets are defined in many ways, and we use them variously in our lives. But we in our lab define mindsets as a core assumption about a domain or category that orients us to a particular set of expectations, what's going to happen, attributions, why is something happening, and also goals. What should I do? So we have mindsets because the world we live in is inherently complex, it's subjective and uncertain, and yet we still need to make predictions in order to act in this uncertain world. Mindsets help us understand a complex reality. It helps simplify and organize that reality. It helps us make predictions or expectations about what might occur. And in turn, it helps us make decisions. It helps us make choices and actions, both on a behavioral level, but also on a physiological level. So let's make this more concrete. You can think about a mindset that maybe some of your children have, or maybe you have, about the domain or category of healthy foods. In our culture, at least in America, we tend to have a more negative mindset about healthy foods. That kind of core assumption that you make about them might be something like, healthy foods are good for me, but they're basically just disgusting and depriving. Of course, these mindsets aren't a complete picture of reality, and they're not necessarily true or false, right or wrong, but they have an impact. They have an impact because they shape and color what's going on in our heads, altering our expectations. So if you think healthy foods are disgusting and depriving, what's your expectation? Your expectation is they're not going to taste very well. You might also have explanations or attributions. If you taste some broccoli that doesn't taste so good, you attribute it to the fact that it's healthy. That's why it doesn't taste good, not the fact that maybe it wasn't fresh or prepared as well as it could be. And it might alter your goals. You might say, well, maybe I'll just avoid those altogether, or I'll endure them if I have to. So those mindsets shape what goes on in our heads, but they also start to color and influence how we interact with the world at large. Mindsets change our attention, what we pay attention to. Mindsets change what we actually do. Mindsets change how we feel and expect to feel. And mindsets, through those processes, can also influence what our bodies are prioritizing and prepared to do. And through those mechanisms, mindsets can play an important role in shaping our health and well-being. So as I go through this talk today, I want to make 3 assertions about mindsets. The first is that they matter. As you've been talking about already in this conference, mindsets can influence our health. But it's not just vague. They're not just making us say we feel better. They influence health through specific and measurable mechanisms. Secondly, mindsets can be changed. And this is a really important aspect of mindsets and why we get so excited about it. And that is that mindsets don't exist in a vacuum. They don't come out of nowhere. They're informed by the social context and the culture and the environments in which we live. So culture, ideas, and institutions, our upbringing can shape our mindsets, but so too can social influence and interactions. In interaction with a health coach or with a trusted healthcare provider, these play a powerful role in shaping our mindsets and in turn influencing our health. We also, as individuals, have conscious choice over our mindsets. We can recognize that the world is not a direct, sort of objective reflection about what actually is, but it's this subjective interpretation. And therefore, we have some choice, some agency in the mindsets we choose to hold. So mindsets matter, mindsets can be changed. And third, I'd like to suggest, and this is really important, that mindsets are integrative. What does that mean? That means that, when we say mindsets about food matter, that doesn't mean that there's no objective qualities of healthy food or that, there's no objective qualities to an illness or a medication, but instead that our mindsets interact with those objective qualities. So there is an effect of medications, our health behaviors, and our genetic makeup, but so too is there an impact of mindset. In other words, the total product of anything we do or experience in the health domain is a combined product of what's actually objectively going on and our mindset about those things. So let's dive in and get into a little bit more detail into the research. And we'll start by focusing on food mindsets. So a lot of this work in this area of food mindsets started off with a seemingly simple study that we did a number of years back. What we found was we gave people the exact same milkshake, same amount of calories, fat content, etc., but oriented towards two very different mindsets through the use of very different labels: a healthy shake, low fat, low calorie, low sugar, or an indulgent shake. So this was the same exact milkshake, only under two different labels. What we found was that when people thought they were consuming something that was healthy and good for them, their body responded as if it didn't have as much food. In other words, when people thought they were consuming an indulgent, a sort of high-fat, high-calorie milkshake, their body's hunger hormone ghrelin dropped at a threefold rate. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, a key finding from that study was that our body's physiological response to the foods we eat does not just depend on the objective amount of nutrients or calories, but it also can be influenced by our mindsets about what we're eating. But there was a second insight to this study that was equally important, and that was the subtle way in which the mindset mattered. I actually went into this study thinking that the better mindset, the more healthy mindset would be, to think you're eating healthy. But what we found was actually the exact opposite. When people thought they were eating healthy or having low calories, what that led to was actually a reduction in feeling physiologically satiated. And that could potentially have impacts on how our bodies respond metabolically over time. So this study, we gave people the exact same milkshake, and we gave them false information about their labels, and it was a milkshake. But we started to wonder, what would happen? Could we change mindsets about healthy foods and do this in a way that was honest and connected to the reality of healthy foods? So the question was this: if the mindset of indulgence is a more adaptive mindset to have, could we make healthy foods seem more indulgent? So to test this, we worked with Stanford dining services, and over the course of a 10-week academic quarter, we randomized the descriptions of the vegetables served in the dining halls into 4 conditions. So in one condition, we just labeled them very basically what they were, such as carrots. In another condition, we gave it a healthy label, but more on the restrictive side, so reduced cholesterol carrots. We had a healthy positive condition where we sort of hyped up the positive aspects of the healthy qualities. And then we had the condition of interest, and that was this more indulgent and sort of delicious qualities, such as twisted citrus carrots. So that was an example for carrots, but you can see here this long list of clever and enticing and tasty and indulgent labels that we put on the vegetables. Now, importantly, all the labels here are true and accurate, so based on the real qualities. And in all cases, the preparation for the vegetables was exactly the same. So you might be wondering, where did you get those, those labels, those ideas? And what's interesting about that is the reality is that those words, those descriptors came from a separate study, a study in which we were examining the language used to describe foods on menus throughout the United States. So we took the top 100 chain restaurants. We looked at those in sort of casual and family dining like Applebee's, Chili's, and so forth. And we analyzed the language that was used to describe those foods. And we were specifically interested in looking at what kind of words or descriptors were used to describe items on the healthy menus where they were designated, and what kind of language or descriptors were used to describe items on the standard menu. We grouped these into themes that conveyed a sense of taste, for example, a sense of indulgent, words like mouth-watering or smothered, and also themes around excitement and so forth. This is the full list of themes we looked at, and what you can see here is quite stark. What we found was that words that conveyed a sense of excitement, fun, provocative, tasty, and indulgent were far more likely to describe items on the standard menu, these less healthy items. On the other hand, what language was used to describe the less healthy or the healthier items? What we found was that the language used to describe healthy items was more conveying, sure, a sense of fresh or micronutrients, but also a sense of boring, thin, and depriving. So what does this mean? This really was sort of surprising. Well, it was alarming to us. And what it showed us was that we have a distasteful inequity in how we go about describing healthy foods. And what we found really interesting was that the words that were used to describe healthy foods did not necessarily have anything to do with the actual foods themselves. It's not like there was some core characteristic about a healthy food that had to be ascribed to that food and an unhealthy food that had to be described to that. And in fact, in some cases, we found the same exact entree presented on both the healthy and the unhealthy side of the menu, but it was still labeled differently. So this is a classic sort of surf and turf dish. What we found was that if it was on the healthy menu, you were reminded that it was served with fresh broccoli. But if it was on the entree side of the menu, what we found was that it was described as juicy, it was a little surf, a little turf, and a whole lot of delicious. So here you can see, same item, same food, just through the ways we describe it, conveys either a sense of sort of boring, depriving healthiness or a sense of indulgent, exciting, and deliciousness. So back to the study at hand, we used that corpus, that body of words from existing menus across the US, and we simply applied them to the vegetables. And here's what we found. When we looked across time, what we found was that when these vegetables were labeled as indulgent and delicious, there was a 45% increase in the number of students choosing these vegetables. Later on, we replicated this study across 5 different schools across the US. And over the course of 138,000 diner decisions, 24 different types of vegetables, and 185 days, we found that there was a 29% increase in consumption of those vegetables. And we know that it wasn't just about choosing them and not eating them, that we also know through different mechanisms, such as measuring the mass in the trash, that people were actually eating those those vegetables as well. And subsequent studies showed that these labels don't just change your preference in the moment, but they can also color and influence how you perceive or what your mindset is about the broader class of healthy foods. So what does all this mean? It's, no surprise to the group of people watching this today, I'm sure, that chronic disease is a problem and it's also preventable. The problem is we haven't been doing a very good job at motivating people to eat healthy or to engage in exercise or other healthy behaviors. We've spent billions of dollars in education and environmental shifts trying to do this. And the sad reality is we haven't been nearly as effective as we need to be. What I hope the study starts to point out is that an often overlooked variable in this process are the mindsets that people have about these healthy behaviors. Even if they know they're important and good for them, they might have counteractive or unhelpful mindsets about those behaviors. And those mindsets can not only color and change your motivation to do them, but they might even impact health directly, sort of counteracting your hard work at getting people to engage in these behaviors. What's worse is that some of the efforts that we're making to try to motivate people to engage in these healthy behaviors, such as putting healthy items and labeling them healthy on menus, actually might be counterproductive in that they're serving to reinforce and reaffirm this unhelpful mindset, in this case, that healthy foods are disgusting, boring, and depriving. So the question really becomes, how can we use our health services, the conversations that we're having with health coaches, as well as the environmental changes that we're making to help establish a more useful, productive mindset about healthy eating, one that not only motivates the behavior itself, but also can influence health by altering physiological mechanisms such as satiety. So going back to these three assertions, what does the study tell us? Well, here they show that mindsets matter. This mindset that healthy foods are tasty can lead to increased consumption, and it can also lead to improved physiological satiation as well as taste, which we've looked at in other studies. Secondly, there's room for change. Once again, this mindset isn't just a direct read of some objective reality that can't be changed. It's a subjective lens that's been crafted and colored through the environment that we live in. And knowing that, we know that we can be empowered to change that, to really rethink the way we describe, talk about, and prescribe healthy eating. And third, there's integrative effects here, right? So mindsets can influence the effect of the same exact food. But this, of course, doesn't mean that the objective quality and taste of the food doesn't matter. What we found in the multi-school study was that schools that on average served more tasty and more delicious food, broadly speaking, had stronger effects. So the real goal here is to both establish a mindset that healthy foods can be delicious, indulgent, and exciting, and also prepare foods in ways that map on and mirror that mindset. That integrative effect is really where the home runs can be made. So that was just a little taste about our work in the area of food mindsets. We've done a lot of similar work in the area of exercise. Similarly, people view exercise as painful, boring, and depriving. And what if we can see them change that to view it as something that's fun, exciting, and social? But let's turn now to a discussion of treatment mindsets. So going back into sort of the chronic disease space and the healthcare space, how do mindsets matter there? So I want to share a little bit about a study we did recently in the context of food allergy treatment. So as many of you might know, allergies are a growing problem, especially in the United States. 1 in 13 Americans under 18 live with a food allergy. And this prevalence, unfortunately, is increasing. The good news is effective treatment exists. So oral immunotherapy treatment is a treatment in which children or adults take gradually increasing doses of the food that they're allergic to, such as a peanut protein flour. And over the course of time, those gradually increasing doses help the body build up immunity to the food that they were formerly allergic to. The problem with this treatment is that even though it's fairly effective, kids and their parents, rightly so, are wary of it. They're now forced to consume the thing that they've been, avoiding at all costs in their lives. And also, as their body builds up tolerance, they experience symptoms, side effects of this, such as, itchy mouth or upset stomach, that can be unpleasant. What we found when we were working with Kari Nato, who's the head of the Stanford Allergy Center, was two really interesting insights. The first was that the meaning of these so-called side effects was actually not so negative. In fact, minor non-life-threatening symptoms such as an upset stomach or an itchy mouth were actually signs that the body was building up tolerance to their allergen. The second thing we found interesting was that conversations about side effects rarely, if ever, focused on this more positive meaning. In fact, they never focused on the meaning of side effects at all. What did they focus on? So we took a minute to look at the mindsets that healthcare providers were currently shaping. And not surprisingly, the way they were going about this was well-intentioned, right? They had a need, an ethical duty to inform the patients of potential side effects. And they also wanted to be empathetic in, helping them deal with them. So they would say something like this, I'm sorry, but I need to warn you. Symptoms are an unfortunate byproduct of treatment. That sounds good. It seems fine. But if you think about how that message might seep into the mindset of the patient, it starts to get really interesting. Well, first they might think, okay, these are uncomfortable side effects that I should try to minimize. But they might go further to kind of question their meanings. They might say, they're unfortunate, but perhaps they're a sign that my allergies are particularly severe, or that I might be resistant to treatment. Or even worse, they might start to think, these side effects are a sign that the treatment is not working for me like it's supposed to. So you can start to see how a simple message about side effects might trickle into the mindset of the patient to start to get them to question not only the efficacy of the treatment, their mindset about treatment, but also the capability of their own body, their mindsets about their bodies. And all of this happened because of a seemingly innocuous conversation about side effects. So we'll call this the symptoms of side effects mindset. We wondered what would happen if we changed this mindset, knowing that actually the true meaning of these side effects was not so negative. What would happen if we could inform them about that meaning? Perhaps the provider could say something instead like, you may experience symptoms, but they mean that the treatment is working. Would a patient then start to think, okay, these symptoms are a sign that the treatment is working and my body is getting stronger? We'll call this the symptoms as positive signals mindset. So we wanted to test this. So we partnered with our colleagues at the Stanford Allergy Center, and we randomized 50 children and their parents to two different conditions. All of the kids went through the exact same oral immunotherapy treatment. This is a 7-month treatment. Everything on a medical front was done exactly the same. The only difference was we addressed one of the groups with just the treatment as usual, symptoms and side effects information. And the other group, we attempted to help instill this mindset that side effects could be a sign that the treatment was working. We gave everybody the exact same safety information, and we had them, gave them information on how to monitor the symptoms and manage them and so forth. How we changed those mindsets was really quite interesting. We did it in a multi-approach strategy. We changed what the providers said to the patients and their parents. We altered the pamphlets that were given to patients and their parents. And we also gave them magnets to put on their fridge for their dosing schedules that served to be a reminder of the message about side effects. So here you can see.
And so what advice would you give to future kids who are going to go through this treatment who might be worried about their symptoms?
Advice to future kids would probably be just to follow the procedures that you tell them, and also, just hang in there.
Okay, so I jumped to that video that really quick. What you can gather is that was a video which we asked them about 5 months into treatment, what they would say to future kids. And that was a kid in the symptoms as side effects condition. It's still a positive message, just a very different mindset about the meaning of symptoms. And here's a video of one of the kids in the symptoms as positive signals condition.
So what advice would you give for future kids who are going to go through this treatment, who might be feeling kind of afraid that they're going to have symptoms? How would you tell them to think about their symptoms?
When you have a symptom, it is actually meaning that your body is fighting off peanuts.
Such cute kids, right? These are just a taster of all the magnificent things they had to say. And this kid actually goes in to describe the genetic expression mechanism for this message. But you can see very interesting different messages and mindsets about these symptoms. And importantly here, it's not that one was, positive and the other was negative. They were both positive and helpful. The only difference was they got down to a deeper sense of meaning. If I experience symptoms, what does that mean? What does that mean about the efficacy of the treatment? What does that mean about the capability of my body? These are mindsets, and it turns out that these mindsets matter quite considerably. So this was just our kind of check of the intervention to see if these messages were taking hold, and what we found is that they were. Participants, kids in this symptoms as positive signals condition, reported a more adaptive mindset about these symptoms. And importantly, what we found was that mindset was associated with some important effects. So we found a significant reduction in the amount of anxiety that kids were experiencing as they went through this treatment. This graph is presenting the children's level of anxiety, but we also found this to be true for the parents. And if you're a parent who has a kid with allergies, you know how anxiety provoking this can be. Interestingly, what we found with symptoms, this is a complex graph, but essentially what we found was that when the doses were smallest, there were no differences in the amount of symptoms that the children reported. But as the doses got bigger, as they were taking more of their allergens, children who viewed symptoms as a sign that the treatment was working actually showed fewer symptoms as the treatment went on. This is interesting from a healthcare cost perspective. What we found is that kids who were given this message that symptoms were positive signals were far less likely to contact the treatment staff related to those symptoms. And then last, but certainly not least, what we found was that this mindset was accompanied by physiological differences, such that those who had the mindset that symptoms were positive signals of treatment efficacy showed greater changes in peanut blood IgG4 levels, which is a biological marker of allergic tolerance. So this paper is out. We've recently published a paper sort of summarizing other studies that have looked at this approach. This was in the context of oral immunotherapy, but you can think about the meaning of side effects as well as treatment mindsets and body mindsets in many other conditions. Most relevant to today, you might think about that in the context of vaccine side effects. So going back to these three assertions, what does this study tell us? Well, here again, it shows us that mindsets matter. In this case, mindsets about symptoms led to changes in affect, how people felt about a treatment, as well as changes in physiology. Second, mindsets can be changed through relatively cost-effective, very cost-effective, and relatively uninvasive changes in the way treatment was delivered, we could alter people's mindsets in meaningful and helpful ways. And third, I think this is really critical. This mindset is integrative. A lot of, our work on mindset, while inspired by placebo effects, is also inspired by the realization that placebo effects ultimately aren't very helpful, because we don't want to go around giving people a fake treatment or a sham procedure. What we want to do is we want to take all the revolutionary advances in medicine and make them even better by understanding and establishing useful mindsets around those advances in treatment and clinical care. So let's think about that a little bit. So if you think about placebo effects, and this is this is a staple in medicine. We know that any new drug or therapy, in order to become able to be prescribed, needs to outperform a placebo. This turns out to be a high standard, a high bar to pass, not because these drugs and therapies aren't effective, but because it's often very hard to show that they work better than a placebo. Now, what's interesting about this model that we have is that, while it's good for demonstrating the specific efficacy of a drug or a treatment, what we find is that in the reality of medicine, if that drug outperforms the placebo, we just completely forget about any benefit that's occurred due to a placebo effect. If we think about what's going on in the reality of medicine, the practice of healthcare, especially in the 21st century, what you realize is that the placebo effect doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't all of a sudden become not relevant. It remains actively in the life and at play as part of the foundation on which the total effect of that treatment rests. So then the question becomes not just, is there a placebo effect, but what is the placebo effect, and how can we leverage it to improve healthcare? Essentially, we break it down into three processes. The first is that the body has a natural ability to heal itself with time, and that alone shouldn't be discounted. Second are our mindsets, our beliefs, our expectations, not just about the treatment, but about our bodies, about illness, and about behaviors. Those can alter health by activating those physiological processes. And third, there's the social context, the words the doctors or the healthcare staff chooses to use. Those can shape or alter the mindset of the patient, which can in turn influence physiological processes. So once we see what's really going on in medicine, all of a sudden we don't have to, we can move out of this drug versus placebo kind of competition and start to ask more interesting and more helpful questions. Questions like, what I just said that mindsets can boost the total effect of treatment, but what mindsets matter most? When it comes to diabetes or cancer or COVID-19 vaccinations, which mindsets are really at play? And importantly, what can we do to best intervene to establish useful mindsets to improve treatment outcomes and the treatment experience? So that's just a high-level overview. And really, the truth is, the research in this area is truly at its infancy. We're really just at the beginning of uncovering the range of potential mindsets that exist in healthcare and in medicine. And we're also at the beginning of really making the most out of leveraging them, measuring them, harnessing them in health and healthcare. I know that Omada has been a leader along these lines, just at the very beginning of just paying attention to these things. But there's so much more that can be done. So I'll stop there. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to share our work. I invite your questions. And also, I invite you to visit our lab website, where you can find a number of publications as well as toolkits to help you leverage and use some of this material. So thank you. And Ramon, I'll turn it back over to you to moderate the questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Crum. That was amazing. There were so many things you said in there that I got really excited about. I was ferociously jotting down notes. I want to get to the questions. We've got a handful that I'm really excited about. There's a couple of themes that I'm noticing in the question sets. Before we do that, I read an article this morning on ESPN.com about a professional athlete. His name is Paul George. He plays in the NBA. And he was talking about how he broke out of a scoring slump that he was in because of simply a mindset change. It wasn't more shots in the gym. It wasn't, strengthening. It wasn't anything like that. It was a mindset change. And my first question for you is a selfish one. Seeing that take place at sort of the professional athlete level, and then I think you contrasted that really nice with some content just from children, right? From kids saying, hey, we're changing our mindset and it's really helping us improve. How do you change mindsets on that scale, realizing that individuals are just that? They're individuals, right? When we're working with people with diabetes, when we're working with people with musculoskeletal conditions, they come from all walks of life. And so how do you make the science of mindset change adaptable to the person that you're trying to affect?
Yeah, such a great point and good question. So as a former athlete myself, I was a gymnast and then a Division I ice hockey player. I've been around a lot of athletes, and athletes know this better than anybody because they know they spend countless hours training their bodies in the gym, and they can be at the top of their game, physiologically speaking. And yet from one day to the next can just perform at completely different levels. And they know that the deal breaker there is their mindset. And so,
right.
I really appreciate that point. But I think as, whether you're an elite athlete or not an athlete at all, you also can be aware of this. You also can start to realize that, day to day, you're still the same physiological species. Maybe that's changing. But what are the mindsets at play here, and how might they be shaping your reality and creating your reality in ways that can be more or less helpful? So your question about how do we do this at scale, or how do we do this for each individual, I think is a really good one. And I think we need a full strategy. When I talked about the influences of mindset, I'm not sure if I can go back to this slide here. You can see that. Where do mindsets come from, right? So at an individual level, we have some agency as individuals to choose our mindsets. Once we become aware of them, we can start to think, is this useful or not? And is there a more adaptive mindset? Then there's the social interaction or influence. So healthcare providers, health coaches, people who have an authority in giving information about healthcare have an enormous opportunity and also enormous responsibility to play in thinking about the mindsets that they're shaping with their patients. But I don't think we should stop at that either. I think, those one-on-one interactions are important, but we also need to recognize that we live in a culture in which messages about health exist and are out there for better or for worse. And this example that I shared with you today, I think around mindsets about healthy food is a really powerful one. Food companies have spent billions of dollars marketing less healthy foods as the thing that's sexy, that's fun, that's indulgent to eat. We have a long way to go to kind of bring back healthy foods up to that level of appeal. But we got to think on all three of these levels.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with you. I've got lots more questions, but the inbox is full. And so we'll get to some of the audience questions first. The first one I'll ask is actually, there's two questions that are very similar to each other. The first comes from L. Taylor and the second comes from Davis Louis. L. Taylor says, love Dr. Crum's work. My question regarding healthy food is whether the research is valid cross-culturally. And then a similar question from Davis Louis, which is this descriptive language an American problem? Do we see the same negative feelings about healthy foods in other cultures?
Wonderful, wonderful questions. The answer is we haven't done as much research as we should cross-culturally. However, the research that exists suggests exactly what you're saying. This is this is a problem in many places, but it's particularly an American problem. You see this less, for example, in France, where there's more of a mindset that, healthy foods are indulgent, that foods you should eat are indulgent. They don't have quite that dichotomy between healthy and indulgent. In the US, what's healthy and what's indulgent are very far apart, and in other places that's closer, especially in France and other countries.
Awesome, helpful. Next question comes from Tom Spring. How much does home environment, engagement in food preparation by parents, family dinner, etc., impact food choices outside of the home by children and young adults?
Such a good question. I have a 2-year-old, and it's just been a fascinating case study of this. So when she was just a few months old, I had all the agency over what she would eat. What I chose was what she wanted. As she's growing up, that's getting harder and harder to do, and you start to see the influences of her peers and her social surroundings starts to outweigh my influence. I think that that doesn't mean that parents don't have an extraordinary influence. What I think needs to be done is we need to shift the focus of that influence. The focus of that influence currently is on getting the kids to eat what you think they should eat because you think it's healthy or good for them. That doesn't work so well. Many of you who know, if you're trying to push, you need to eat your broccoli before you get the ice cream. It not only doesn't work, it also can sometimes backfire, because that pushing to get them to eat something can kind of create the mindset that healthy food is the less desirable thing to eat. So what I think we need to do, we need a lot more research on this, is to start to think about how we as parents can influence mindsets, not just shape behavior. Yeah. So my challenge, what I try to do, at least with my kid, is when we serve broccoli, we start to talk about how delicious and exciting it is. I don't make her eat it. We just talk about how good it is, and we try to prepare it in ways that are delicious. I also try to downplay the excitement of the less healthy foods. That doesn't mean I prevent them from eating it, but just downplay just how tasty is that really compared to some of these other foods. So parents have, as kids get older, less of an influence, but I think we can make our influence more impactful by focusing on mindset rather than behavior.
Super interesting. I've realized that my 2-year-old gets much more excited about his fruit snacks than he does his Brussels sprouts. And so apparently he needs a mindset change. I'll talk to him about that when he gets home from daycare today. Next couple of questions we have in here are just around COVID-19 and vaccinations. You obviously touched on this a couple of times throughout your conversation and your presentation here. But the questions are just around, have you talked to any government agencies, anyone who's really administering vaccines, potentially as part of Stanford, to get this mindset shift out there to say, hey, look, maybe some of the side effects that people are experiencing from COVID vaccines are actually a good thing?
Yeah, we have, and this mindset turns out to be particularly well supported in the context of the COVID-19 vaccines, that, many of these non-life-threatening side effects that people experience, such as fatigue or feeling icky or fever, are indeed a sign that the immune system is stronger. And if you actually look, I've been quite pleased to see that message is out there. It's included on CDC, WHO websites. Yeah. Dr. Fauci talks about it and so forth. I still think, we're testing it now. So I can share those results with you in a future presentation. But the question is how, is a one-liner enough, right? And
right.
Get people to realize this. And so we're thinking about ways to really help people internalize that message more. And part of that is, I think people don't understand how vaccines work. I didn't understand how vaccines work. It took me a lot of effort to kind of really truly figure that out. And I think as a society, we haven't done a good enough job to help empower people to understand them at a level that is relatable rather than sort of scientific and jargony. And I think there's a lot of room for growth along those lines.
Awesome. I know we only have a few minutes left here, and we still have a handful of questions to get through. So I'm going to try and ask a few of them that can hopefully be answered fairly concisely here. The first one is from Davis Louis. He says, have you seen the film The Farewell? Is it possible because the family didn't tell the grandmother she had lung cancer that she did better?
That's a tough one. I have seen that movie. Highly recommend it. It gets into tricky territory. I think that's certainly possible. The main premise of the movie, for those who haven't seen it, is that grandmother has lung cancer. They choose not to tell her, so people are interacting with her not in a way that makes her, think that she's going to pass away from lung cancer, and as a result, she lives longer. I think there's some truth to that, but the work we do, I often, I find it critical to make two key points. The first is that, again, these mindsets aren't everything, right? So having the mindset that you don't have cancer, that everything's fine, or that there are no side effects, that's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to reduce the likelihood of side effects. There is an objective reality that we need to honor and we need to grapple with. The second is that we never advocate for establishing mindsets that are untrue or not connected to reality. I think in the long run, establishing a mindset that is disconnected from reality will backfire and have negative consequences. That said, there's enormous room within the context of true reality to improve or adopt more useful mindsets. So, for example, in the context of cancer, we would never advocate to try to say, oh, you don't have cancer. The mindset that's useful there is cancer is manageable, not a catastrophe, or even cancer could be an opportunity. These are adaptive mindsets that are still grounded in the reality of what's going on. So those are, it's a very good question, and that's our view on it. It should be grounded in reality and never, inaccurate.
Awesome. I know we've got to let you go here. There's a bunch of questions, and we will try and answer all of them in the follow-up, but I'll just ask you one final one here. I'm summarizing a couple of different questions that have come in, and it's just around durability or the time it takes to do this. There's a few questions around mindset change is hard. It takes time. And so talk to me a little bit, just as you exit the stage here, around how difficult it is to change mindset over time and make that mindset change be permanent.
Yeah, great question. It depends on the domain, and it depends on the degree to which there's a opposite and opposing mindset that you need to combat. I think we've in the food mindset domain, I think it's been harder because we're up against very strong forces trying to persuade people that healthy foods are not as exciting and indulgent as other things. However, it's still possible, right? Even just the changing a label was enough to get people to consume more food. How long does that last is questionable. On the other hand, there are cases where there aren't well-established maladaptive mindsets, such as the context of vaccine side effects, for example, or the meaning of symptoms in a treatment you've never had before. Those mindsets actually can be more efficiently and quickly instilled just by mindful and thoughtful messaging around that. Our work on stress mindsets, we try to get people to see the enhancing nature of stress. And even though there's a lot of information about the debilitating aspects, we find that through true research and anecdotes, we can inspire more adaptive mindsets through just an hour-long training session. How do mindsets sustain is another question. It depends again, but the opportunity is to create a mindset which then informs the effect, the reality, and that reality serves to reinforce the mindset. So when this works, it works because of a self-fulfilling spiral initiated by mindset, but reaffirmed and maintained through the outcomes that we get in our life.
That's awesome. Again, I can't thank you enough on behalf of Omada. Thank you so much for being here. This was great. I think definitely one of the highlights of today. There's so many things that I want to keep asking and keep talking about. And I know you'll help answer some of this stuff as part of the follow-up. But again, Dr. Crum, thank you so much. We'll let you go at this point, and I'll close this out here at the end of day one. But again, can't thank you enough for just your time and expertise. Incredibly valuable.
Great. Yeah. And again, we're just, really this is the tip of the iceberg. So if you're interested in this work, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We look forward to your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay. Thanks again to all of our guest speakers for their time and expertise. We've got another exciting agenda teed up for everyone tomorrow, starting with a relaxing 7 a.m. Pacific time yoga class with our very own Adrienne Zan, as well as panels with Costco Wholesale, Cigna, and American author Jeffrey Pfeffer. This concludes our first day of Mindset